This is all I ever owed you. We're square." My father said those exact words the same afternoon I held the keys to my very first home. Before I tell you what happened after, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you're new here, please subscribe, because what he handed me across that dinner table was only the beginning of a truth I had been kept from my entire life. My name is Cora, and I want to tell you about the day I thought would be the proudest of my life, and how I discovered that day had already been stolen from me once before. I was 31 years old when I closed on my condo in the East End of Ottawa. It wasn't anything grand. One bedroom on the third floor of a building near the Rideau River, with a small balcony that looked out over the parking lot and, if you stood at the right angle, a narrow strip of water beyond it. But I had saved for 6 years for that down payment. 6 years of packing my lunch, of tracking every dollar in a notebook I kept beside my bed, of setting up automatic transfers to my savings account every payday and telling myself that each one was another step forward. I had graduated from the University of Ottawa with a business degree and a debt load from OSAP that took years to clear. I had worked through every semester, 5 days a week at a property management office on Elgin Street, Friday and Saturday evenings at a restaurant near the market, sometimes both in the same day, which meant eating my dinner standing over the kitchen sink at 11 o'clock at night and setting my alarm for 6. When the notary slid the keys across the desk and told me the property was mine, I could not speak for a moment. I just held them in my fist and breathed. My mother had died when I was 9, ovarian cancer, fast and relentless the way those things often are. I have pieces of her that are still sharp after all this time. The smell of the hand cream she kept by the sink, the way she hummed without realizing she was doing it, her voice on a home video my aunt had preserved on an old tape, and eventually had converted to digital. She used to call me Bug when she was being tender. I don't know why. She just did. My Aunt Cecil was my mother's younger sister by 4 years. She had always been the one who kept that connection alive. She was the person who told me, at every birthday and every milestone, that my mother would have been so proud. She meant it every time, and every time I believed her, even when the rest of the day had been difficult. My father Victor remarried when I was 12. His new wife Pauline was not unkind to me. She was simply neutral in the way a piece of furniture is neutral, present, taking up space, not particularly warm. My half-brother Drew was born when I was 14. I never blamed him for anything. He was a child, the same as I had been, but I noticed even then the small asymmetries, the summer camps he got to attend, the hockey equipment that appeared without discussion. When he was accepted into a private school in Nepean in 9th grade, my father talked about it, the way some people talk about their own accomplishments. I told myself it was just the way blended families worked. I told myself my father loved me equally but expressed it in different terms. I made those excuses for years, the way children do when the alternative explanation is too heavy to carry. The day I closed on my condo, I invited the people who mattered. Aunt Cecile, my friend Tanya, who had been my closest friend since our second year of university and who now worked as a CPA at a firm in Canada, and my father, because I still believed, in some persistent and perhaps foolish way, that he would rise to the occasion. We went for dinner afterward at a Lebanese place near the Byward Market, warm bread and shared plates and sparkling wine that Tanya had insisted on ordering. Aunt Cecile kept squeezing my hand across the table. Even Pauline seemed pleasant that evening, asking questions about the building and the neighborhood. The night felt full. I let myself feel proud quietly, in the way I had trained myself to feel things I wasn't sure I was allowed to show. Then my father reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He placed a white envelope in front of me without announcing what it was. I looked at it, then at him. "A little something," he said. I picked it up. It wasn't sealed. Inside were 6 $100 bills, crisp and folded once, 600 Canadian dollars in cash. I counted them without meaning to. I looked up expecting him to say something else, to add a word, a joke, anything to give the gesture a shape. He picked up his water glass. "Thanks, Dad," I said carefully. He nodded once, and then he leaned slightly forward and said, in a voice that was low but not private, "That's all I ever owed you, Cora. We're square." I remember the exact sound of Tanya setting her glass down on the table. I remember Aunt Cecile going completely still. I looked at my father. He was not joking. There was something almost relieved in his expression, as though he had been carrying a line he'd rehearsed, and was glad to finally be rid of it. "I'm sorry," I said. "I raised you," he said, kept a roof over your head, made sure you had what you needed. $600 is more than fair for all of that. We're square. The table went quiet in the specific way that tables go quiet when something has been said that no one knows how to immediately answer. Pauline studied the tablecloth. Tanya was looking at a point somewhere past my father's left shoulder. I set the envelope on the table in front of me. My face felt hot. I had just signed the largest financial commitment of my life, the result of 6 years of discipline and sacrifice, and the man across from me had decided tonight was the moment to settle what he described as a debt, as though I were an account that had been running too long, and he was finally closing it out. I wasn't aware there was an amount, I said. There's always an amount, he said. Aunt Cecile put her fork down very carefully. She was looking at my father the way I had never seen her look at anyone, measuring something, deciding something. She didn't say anything at the table, she waited. In the parking lot afterward, when my father's car had turned out of sight, and the cold October air was coming off the river in sharp, clean waves, she reached for my arm. Cora. Her voice was different from what it had been all evening, quieter but carrying more weight somehow. Can you come and see me this week? There's something I need to show you. I looked at her in the dark. What kind of something? She shook her head. Not here. Come Thursday, just yourself, and don't mention it to your father. I drove to my new condo and stood in the empty living room with the keys in my hand and the lights still off. I should have felt good. I had worked so hard for this room. Instead, I stood there in the dark, turning over my aunt's expression in the parking lot, wondering what she had been keeping and why. Thursday arrived, and she answered the door before I had finished knocking. She brought me into the kitchen and set coffee in front of me, and then, instead of sitting down, she went to the back hallway and returned carrying a shoebox with an elastic band around it. She put it on the table and sat across from me. Your mother gave me this, she said. She asked me to hold it for safekeeping. She told me she had explained everything to your father, and that he would look after you properly. She paused. I believed her, and so I believed him. I looked at the box. She removed the elastic band and lifted the lid. Inside were documents, photocopied pages, a letter on law firm stationery, some handwritten notes in my mother's handwriting that I recognized immediately, that looping cursive I had not seen in over 20 years. Cecile slid the top sheet toward me. Your mother set up a testamentary trust for you, she said. Before she died, she put her life insurance payout and her personal savings into it. Your father was named the trustee. I read my own name on the document, Cora Elizabeth Whitfield, beneficiary, then my mother's name, then my father's. I had a trust fund, I said. It was not a question, exactly. It was more like saying something out loud to make it real. You had an estate, Cecile said. It was meant to fund your university education and give you a proper start after. It should have covered your tuition completely, and there would have been money left after. She looked at me steadily across the table. She wanted you to have a foundation, Cora. That was the whole point. I sat back in my chair. I thought about the OSAP applications, the financial aid forms I had filled out every September, carefully documenting every dollar I earned, every scholarship I had applied for, every part-time job. The summer between second and third year when I had eaten rice and canned chickpeas for most of August, because I couldn't stretch my paycheck past the 15th. The text messages I had sent my father asking, carefully, apologetically, hating myself for asking whether there was any way he could help with rent. His reply every time, some variation of the same thing. There's nothing there, Cora. You need to learn to manage on your own. How much? I asked. Cecile hesitated for a moment. When she set it up, in today's value, roughly $87,000. The number sat between us on the kitchen table, and I could not figure out where to put it. $87,000. In an account with my name on it, that had existed while I took out $62,000 in student loans and paid them off over 4 years of working beside my first real job. That had existed while I counted down the days between paychecks and told myself I simply wasn't the kind of person who got a head start. Why didn't you ever ask him? I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. Cecile looked at her hands. I thought he was using it for you. Books. I assumed all of that was coming from the trust. He was the trustee. He had the legal responsibility to manage those funds for your benefit. She stopped and then said quietly, I trusted my sister's judgment, and she trusted him. I called Tanya on the drive home. She came to my condo that evening, and we spread everything across the kitchen counter, The documents from the shoebox, my old OSAP statements, my university financial aid records. She put on her reading glasses and went through the pages for 20 minutes without speaking. These trust assets should have been declared on your financial aid applications, she said finally. If your father controlled an account in your name, it was a reportable asset. It would have reduced your OSAP eligibility significantly. She looked at me. But it was never listed on any of these forms. What does that mean? It means either it wasn't declared, which is its own issue, or the money wasn't there by the time you were applying. She tapped the page. You need the full transaction history for that trust account. Every withdrawal, every transfer, going back to when it was opened. And you need the law firm that handled your mother's estate to confirm their records. She helped me draft the formal requests. Then she said the same thing Aunt Cecile had said. Don't contact your father yet. If he realizes you're looking, anything missing from the paper trail becomes much harder to establish. I understood the reasoning, but it meant sitting across from him at a Sunday dinner 2 weeks later, making conversation about the senators and the new grocery store near my building, while he poured himself more coffee and acted like a man with no particular weight on his conscience. One evening I went to his house in Nepean on a pretense, dropping off a card for Pauline's birthday. We talked about their basement and a water issue they'd had in September. Then very carefully, I said I had been going through some old photos of my mother and had come across some paperwork I didn't fully understand. His hands stopped. What kind of paperwork? He asked. State documents, I said, legal stuff. Most of it went over my head. Pauline came in from the hall. Staying for dinner, Cora? No, I said. I should head home. I looked at my father. Did Mum leave anything specifically for me? From her estate, I mean. The room was completely still. His jaw tightened so slightly that someone who didn't know him well might not have noticed. Your mother's estate was handled properly, he said. Everything that could be done was done. You had a home. You went to university. I had student loans, I said. Quite a lot of them. Everyone has student loans. I picked up my coat. Right. Thanks for the coffee. I sat in my car in his driveway for a long moment before I started the engine. He hadn't given me proof of anything. But he had given me something more useful. That the question of my mother's estate was the single subject he did not want me anywhere near. The records arrived 12 days later. The trust's law firm provided the account history as they were legally required to do, once I came forward as the named beneficiary. Tanya and I went through everything together at her office on a Tuesday afternoon. The trust had been opened with a lump sum deposit of $87,000, transferred in from my mother's estate in the year she died. The account had remained active for over a decade. Then Tanya pointed to the withdrawal column. There were dozens of entries, thousands of dollars at a time, sometimes tens of thousands. Each had a description attached. A home renovation in Nepean, the basement project my father had mentioned over the years as something he had managed entirely on his own. A family vacation to Cancun in March of the year I had spent that March break at Aunt Cecile's because I hadn't been invited. 3 consecutive years of private school tuition payments to Hillcrest Academy in Drew's name. A car purchase in my father's name. RRSP contributions transferred directly into my father's retirement account, drawn from a trust that legally belonged to me. I found one withdrawal with my name attached. $1,200 in my first September at university, described as student expenses, Cora. $1,200. In 9 years of withdrawals totaling more than $70,000. I held it together until I got home, and then I didn't. I wasn't crying for myself exactly. I was crying for the version of my mother who had done everything right, who had been deliberate and careful and thorough, who had met with a lawyer and signed documents and set up an account with my name on it, who had trusted the one person she had every reason to believe would carry it out properly. She had done her best. She had been careful enough for both of them, and it had meant nothing. I called Cecile and told her what the records showed. She was quiet for so long that I thought the call had dropped. I should have asked every year, she finally said. I should have demanded to see the statements. You trusted him, I said. She trusted him. Before I contacted a lawyer, I asked my aunt for one more thing. I wanted everyone in the same room. My father, Pauline, Drew, Cecile, me. I wanted to say it out loud in front of the people it had affected, where it couldn't be quietly managed away or reframed as a misunderstanding between just the two of us. Cecile agreed to host a dinner. She told my father it was a proper belated celebration for the condo, that the restaurant had felt rushed and she wanted to do it right. He agreed without suspicion. Pauline said she would bring dessert. The night before, I sat at my kitchen table and sorted the documents into 2 labeled folders, one for the trust account history, one for my OSAP records and financial aid forms. Every major withdrawal was highlighted. Every year was accounted for. I was not going to shout. I was not going to say anything I couldn't point to on a page. I was simply going to put the documents at the center of the table and let them do what I couldn't. The evening began the way those evenings do. Coats on the rack, small talk about the drive over, Pauline's dessert in a white bakery box on the counter. Drew came in a few minutes late, apologetic and red-cheeked from the cold. We sat around Cecile's table and ate, and the conversation was easy and ordinary enough that by the time the main course was finished, I almost couldn't believe what I was about to do. I stood up and went to the front closet. I came back with both folders and set them on the table. "I'd like to talk about something," I said. My father looked at the folders. His hands, which had been resting loosely on the table, moved to his lap. "These are the records from my mother's trust," I said. "The testamentary trust she set up for me before she died. The one you were named trustee of." Pauline looked at my father. Drew looked at me. "The account was opened with $87,000, I said. I opened the first folder and placed the statement in front of him. "I'd like you to look at the withdrawal history." He didn't look at the paper. He looked at me. "That money was used for the family," he said. "For all of us. You were part of this family." "One transaction has my name on it," I said. $1,200. In my first year of university, the same year I signed for OSAP loans to cover my rent. I opened the second folder and placed my financial aid records beside the bank statement. "These show I declared 0 assets. Because you told me there were no assets." No one spoke. "The Cancun trip," I said, keeping my voice flat and even. "Hillcrest Academy, 3 years of tuition for Drew. The basement renovation. The RRSP contributions." I touched each highlighted line. "None of that is my education or my future." Drew looked down at the page. He said very quietly, "Dad." My father pushed back from the table. The chair scraped hard against the floor. "I gave you everything I had," he said. "I raised you alone for 3 years before Pauline came along. I kept you fed and clothed, and in school. If you think gratitude means dragging your family through." "She wrote it down," Aunt Cecile said. "She had been still all evening. Your wife wrote down exactly what she wanted done with that money. She put it in a legal document, and you signed your name to it." My father looked at Cecile for a moment. Then he picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. Pauline stood immediately and followed him to the hallway. She paused at the door for a moment and looked back at me. A complicated look. Something between guilt and resignation, and then the front door closed. Drew remained at the table. He was staring at the highlighted lines in the withdrawal record. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. "I didn't know," he said. "Cora, I genuinely did not know." I believed him. That was the part that caught me off guard. I had been so prepared to feel righteous, and instead what I felt was a sadness so specific and so deep that I didn't know what to do with it at first. He hadn't known. He had just lived the life my father had funded, without understanding where the money came from. That wasn't his fault. And it didn't make what my father had done any smaller. Over the following months, I worked with an estate lawyer who specialized in trustee misconduct. The records were clear enough, the paper trail thorough enough, that my father's own counsel advised him to settle rather than contest the matter in court. The settlement didn't recover everything. Some of what had been spent could not be recovered, but it returned a substantial portion, confirmed through a formal legal process as money that had been mine. When Ms. Archer called me to confirm the final figure, I sat in her office and read the number twice, and thought about all the years I had spent believing I was simply the kind of person who had to earn everything the hard way, who didn't get help, who wasn't entitled to a cushion. I had believed that because I had been told it. I had been told it, over and over, by someone who had every financial reason to make sure I kept believing. I paid down several years of my mortgage with part of the settlement. The rest went into investments, careful and unglamorous, exactly the kind my mother had preferred, according to Cecile. Cecile gave me something else. The day after the settlement was finalized, she called me to her house in Gloucester and placed a small envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a letter in my mother's handwriting, dated 3 months before she died, addressed to me. She had written it knowing she wouldn't be there to give it. She had asked Cecile to hold it until I was old enough to understand it. Cecile had kept it for 22 years. I will not share all of it. Some things stay private, but one line is still with me the way certain things lodge and don't leave. I'm leaving you what I can, Bug. I hope it opens doors. She had meant every word. She had done everything she could with the time she had. She had been as careful and deliberate as a person can be, and she had entrusted the outcome to someone she had no reason to distrust. That was the cruelest part. Not that she had failed, but that she hadn't. She had done her part completely, and her trust had been handed to someone who was never going to honor it. I framed the letter. It hangs above my desk now, in the condo near the Rideau River, beside the window that looks out over the parking lot and, past it, the thin strip of water that catches the light in the morning. And the $600, the crisp bills my father laid in front of me that October evening like a closed account, like the end of a ledger. I kept those too. I folded them back into the envelope and put them in my desk drawer, and I have not spent a single one of them. He had handed them across the table with such certainty, such finality, were square. The words of a man who believed he had calculated every variable and come out even. He had no idea what he was actually handing me. Not $600, not closure, not the end of anything. He handed me the first thread, and the moment I pulled it, everything he had built around that silence began to come apart. I spent years telling myself I was not the kind of person who got a head start. I had internalized it so completely that I built an identity around it. I was the one who earned everything alone, who didn't ask for help because there was no help to ask for. I believed it because I was told it, and I was told it over and over by the one person who had every reason to keep me believing. My mother had known better. She had done everything in her power to make sure that one day I would find out. Before you go, one question. If someone handed you that envelope across a table, said those words, and you later found out what it meant, would you have pulled the thread, or would you have let it rest? Leave me your answer in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe, because this was only the beginning.